Hello and welcome to the second annual Libraries Are Essential program at the U.S. Book Show, brought to you by Publishers Weekly. My name is Andrew Richard Albanese, and I'm a senior writer at Publishers Weekly, and it's my honor to be your co-host for today's program. Before we get started, I just want to share a few quick housekeeping notes. For those of you who were registered for today's program, I want to emphasize that your registration gives you access to all of our U.S. Book Show programming, and we certainly hope you'll take advantage. This year's U.S. Book Show will once again feature discussions with publishers large and small about upcoming books in a variety of categories, and all of our programming will be archived, so there's no need to miss anything. With today's Libraries Are Essential program, we're going to take a look at some of the key issues facing libraries, from this pernicious wave of book bans to developments in the digital market to the health and safety of library workers and what library leadership is facing as we barrel towards this post-pandemic future. Before we start, though, I want to say a few words about this so-called post-pandemic future. You know, when we launched the U.S. Book Show online last year, it was the culmination of some pretty extraordinary circumstances. And a year later, the circumstances are no less extraordinary. We've now lost 1 million lives in the U.S. alone to COVID-19, a staggering loss. And of course, the pandemic is not the only seismic event of the last 2 years. This week marks the 2-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, and we are still in the midst of a racial and social justice awakening. But if you had asked me at the close of last year's event where we'd be in 2022, I don't think I would have imagined that libraries and schools today would be facing a wave of book bans and other legislation targeting the freedom to read, or that libraries and publishers would be clashing in court over equitable access to ebooks. And though we've all but ended most pandemic restrictions, that COVID-19 would still be so far from over. There's no question that the library community rose to the challenge of the pandemic. But now it seems some of the hardest work still looms, which is truly addressing the important issues that have been pulled into sharp relief over the last 2 years. Meanwhile, life is getting back to, well, life. On a personal note, this year's program was harder for me to pull together this year, if only because I found that people simply had less bandwidth. You know, in many cases, people are back in the workplace, but they're also traveling, going to graduation ceremonies, hosting weddings, seeing their extended families. And that's all positive. But I think a theme of today's program is that while we're getting a glimpse of what our post-pandemic future can look like, we have a lot of work to get to that post-pandemic future safely and to make that post-pandemic future like we want and need it to look. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend and co-host for today, Sari Feldman. Many of you know Sari well. She is the former executive director of the Cuyahoga County Public Library and a past president of the Public Library Association and the American Library Association. She is now a valued contributor and columnist for Publishers Weekly. Please welcome Sari Feldman.
Thanks, Andrew. I am delighted to be at the U.S. Book Show 2022, and I want to thank you for inviting me to host with you today, and also for keeping the focus on libraries. I appreciate PW and your interest in what's happening at libraries. Throughout the pandemic, I have marveled at the ingenuity and creativity of librarians and library workers. With shuttered buildings and new safety issues and protocols, they all have found ways to provide access, information, and programs for people of all ages. Clearly, libraries are essential. I have also marveled at the rapid escalation of digital adoption. After more than 2 decades of steady growth, library ebooks and audiobooks and other formats have become commonplace addition to libraries, resulting in new customer expectations and new pressures on libraries and library workers. These are just 2 topics among many worth gathering for and talking about. So let's get started, and thank you for joining us today.
Before we get into our morning discussions today, I want to bring in some special guests to talk about a few things, including the upcoming ALA Annual Conference, which is back in person next month for the first time since 2019. So please welcome today Patty Wong, City Librarian of Santa Clara, California. Wong is president of the American Library Association. Her term is set to conclude in June at the 2022 Annual Conference in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Patty.
Thank you, Andrew.
And I also have with me today Lessa Kananiopua Palaio Lozada. She's the Adult Services Assistant Manager at the Palos Verdes Library District in Southern California and your President-elect of the American Library Association. She'll be taking the reins from Patty in Washington, D.C. this summer. Welcome, Lessa.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So happy to be here.
Thank you both for joining us today at the Libraries Are Essential program here at the U.S. Book Show. Patty, I'll start with you. Because it just so happens, as I mentioned, this is going to be the first ALA annual conference since 2019, and it's in Washington, D.C., always a very well-attended event, usually in Washington, D.C. But after a few years of librarians rising to the challenge of the pandemic, and all we've learned from the experience, I feel like there's an opportunity for this annual conference when we come back that it can almost feel like a march on Washington. Like it's a golden opportunity for librarians to sort of show up en masse and remind lawmakers and people around the nation of the essential roles that librarians filled during the pandemic, and that they always hold down in their communities, especially now given the book bans and all the other political attacks we're seeing on librarians in many other states. Talk a little bit about what's going to be on the agenda at the conference, and do you share my feeling that this conference is sort of an opportunity for librarians to make a statement?
Absolutely, Andrew. This annual conference will definitely allow us to make really many strong statements. Dozens of sessions related to the urgent issues and opportunities facing the field, including those that you mentioned: intellectual freedom, censorship, and the alarming rise in attempts at book banning, and advocacy in a highly politicized environment, as well as digital access and literacy, ebooks, and electronic resources, integrating equity, diversity, inclusion, and social justice into your programs, collection, staffing, community outreach, and services to incarcerated and returning individuals, with a focus on upcoming revisions to the prison library standards. In addition, there's going to be a wide range of programming addressing ongoing areas that underpin successful library work and are constantly being reinvented as the world changes. Areas such as leadership and management, buildings and facilities, budget planning and finance, reference and user experience, legislation, and working with friends groups and trustees. It really is an opportunity for us to showcase how libraries are changing and to make continual statements. There's going to be a dozen world-class speakers that will appear on our main stage and more than 80 author presentations on 8 live stages. I'm thrilled that we have such strong Asian American Pacific Islander representation among our speakers, including my own president's program, which is called Advancing the Asian American Story, a conversation with publishers, literary advocates, and storytellers, where award-winning authors, publishers, and literacy advocates Melinda Lowe, Jane Park, Linda Sue Park, Philip Lee, and Christine Sorntonvat will discuss new ways to tell Asian American stories, how to get books into the hands of readers, and as well as the strong place in terms of community building. I'm looking forward to this new approach that we're also taking an opportunity to actually talk about the impact on digital equity. I'm hosting a fireside chat with FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel. Arguably, she's one of the most powerful federal policymakers when it comes to information access. And a real ally of America's libraries, will benefit from her insights into current issues, such as preserving a free and open internet and net neutrality, and bridging and closing the digital divide. We're looking forward to seeing everyone who can commit to attending the whole conference, as well as those who can join us for specific days. DC is such an easy place to get to from many places on the East Coast, so we know it will be welcoming from many regional areas.
So I was at the PLA conference recently in March in Portland, Oregon, and it was kind of emotional, to be honest. I witnessed quite a few librarians just really happy to be back together in person. It felt very safe. Everybody was wearing masks, and I give it to the librarians because they certainly respect safety. They understand what's at stake here. But tell me what it's like. Pat, what is it like, Ben? ALA's, I think, has done a great job with virtual conferences during the pandemic. But what is it going to mean to be back in person? Why is it important that ALA get back in person?
Andrew, it's really exciting to really think about the opportunity for us to gather together, to share stories, to network. Um, we really do think that ALA is a leading convener of library practitioners and stakeholders. We've been repeatedly told that people have missed the opportunities to come back together again as a body, and that ALA conferences really provide that extra touch on an unparalleled scale. The program for this annual, as I've mentioned, is exceptionally strong, but it's also an opportunity to hear from leaders and experts in the field, memorable speakers and authors, but also to network again, to really to touch one another in so many ways, and really to have that professional exchange that we all miss so much. The whole conference will offer an unforgettable set of experiences, an infusion of energy, of new ideas, mutual peer support that's really been missing, I think, for many of us, inspiration, and celebrations of many of the outstanding accomplishments since we were last together. What it means for librarians to come together is really joy in reuniting, both personally as well as professionally. Of course, seeing old friends, making new connections. There's really a unique chance to share experience and expertise as we address and solve a lot of the key and urgent challenges that have come up during this time of COVID and isolation. And the fact is that this opportunity will bring back together this body after 2 very long years. ALA is keenly aware, as you mentioned, about the need to keep everyone safe and mask up, and proof of COVID vaccination will be required on site for attendance in the conference. But we're really looking forward to seeing everyone and rekindling all of those connections and making new relationships.
Lessa, you are, I'm going to refer to you as a pandemic president because you ran for president, right? And if I'm not mistaken, and you were elected entirely during this little COVID period here. And you know, what made you want to step up to a leadership position in such a tumultuous time? Because, you know, the jobs that librarians and library workers do every day require so much energy and devotion. You could be forgiven if you just, you know, wanted to focus on getting through this period and doing your job. But talk a little bit about the importance of, you know, serving the profession and why engagement with ALA is so important and why it was so important to you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the pandemic did weird things to all of us. I kind of include this in it. But seriously, though, the short answer is I felt like I could make an impact. You know, how big of one, I wasn't sure, but I really just felt called to the role because of a few things. You know, number one is the pandemic and ALA's response. As someone who was on the executive board at the time that it hit and finishing up my 3-year term, I saw the struggles that we had as an association balancing the needs of our members with state and local laws. And once I was off the board through the summer, I saw the continued struggle as our country came into that social and racial reckoning. And I felt called to do more, to do something, and to at least try to help our members and our communities in this role. Because of course, the role of ALA president as spokesperson for the association and libraries gives us a real opportunity to recognize the pain and the trauma from the last few years, and that it's not over, and to speak up and speak out about the brave things our library workers did and do for all of our brave communities. I wanted to be a part of that and uplift those who did that brave work. And then on the other side of the coin for running was, as I mentioned, I was ending my executive board term and ending my chairship of the Steering Committee on Organizational Effectiveness, or SCOE as it was so lovingly called, which is the committee that jump-started this round of evaluating our governance structure, member engagement, and how to improve. And I felt that I needed to have a role in the change management that came along with all that work and the work that has continued since the committee's end. So in addition to the role of spokesperson, the president, of course, also chairs the executive board and council and can be a huge conduit in creating and managing change. And I felt it my responsibility to at least try to see the work that I and others do a little bit longer.
So let me follow up a little bit on that and ask you what you've been hearing from ALA members, from the librarians and library workers that ALA represents. What's on the minds of your members about where libraries are as we start to think about our post-pandemic future, and what do they want to focus on as we gather in Washington this summer?
You know, our brave communities, our brave library workers have been so creative throughout the last few years and continuing to deliver services as safely as possible to the communities who need it most, and have been so innovative. Across the profession, library workers are increasing their focus on transformation over transaction. And during the pandemic, we saw a dramatic upswing in digital content and services, as well as low-tech outreach. Just as community needs change and have changed, so do our programs and services. You know, in my own community, where local history love is huge, we love our local history and our community. When folks couldn't visit our local history center, which is always a hop in place, our local history librarian, Monique Sugimoto, started Pedal PV, where she literally rode her electric bike around town and gave virtual tours of the peninsula, sometimes solo, sometimes with other community members. And that kind of innovation and tapping into things that once kind of felt beyond our realm are now part of the everyday for us. And of course, there's also the continued push to assert and recommit ourselves to equity, diversity, and inclusion every day. They are fundamental values of the association. And of course, diversity is one of ALA's key action areas and an area of personal action. But I also find it so important, and our communities find it so important, to focus on the intersectionalities of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how these terms and concepts apply to more than race and ethnicity. While we often start with race because it is the greatest predictor of one's life outcomes, it also applies to physical disabilities, sexual orientation, age, language, and social class. So we are shifting our programming, collections, and services to ensure that we are representing and supporting all of our communities, all of our intersectionalities, and our own as they influence who we are as library workers. And then, you know, in less light news, I don't know, but right now we're facing book challenges, right? It's at the forefront of everyone's mind right now. Library staff in every state faced an unprecedented number of attempts to ban books in 2021. Last year, ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom tracked over 700 challenges to library, school, and university materials and services, the most challenges in the 20 years the office has been tracking. And that's just what's been actually reported.
Patty and Lessa, very quickly, final thoughts. Anything you want to leave us with before we move in? We're going to be talking about book bans in the second part of our discussion this morning, so I'm glad you brought that up. But final thoughts that you want to leave is, you know, Patty, as you, end your presidency, and Lessa, as you begin yours. Patty, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. You know, throughout this year, it's been difficult, and challenging for our libraries and library workers throughout the country. But libraries continue to be probably one of the most resilient people we know. They pivoted. They've created equity in thinking around bringing more digital access to each of their communities, especially those communities that are most impacted, communities of color, youth, and those who are unsheltered, who felt the greatest need. Librarians have been able to be innovative and creative. In my presidency, I've had the opportunity, even though virtual, to visit thousands of, especially rural, small, and tribal and prison library staff that actually continue to make the difference. And libraries across the country are doing such a phenomenal job. What we're looking forward to is sometimes creating a little bit of a new normal, and reconvening a lot of those services, and also reimagining ourselves a little bit as we move forward. The increase in book bans and challenges is very sobering. The Unite Against Book Bans campaign will really engage individuals and communities to join together to share our commitment to the freedom to read.
And Lessa.
I just want to really echo Patty's, we can't go back to pre-pandemic normal because it wasn't great for everyone and it wasn't our ideal. We have to fight that urge to go back to what felt comfortable and instead continue incorporating the universal design principles that we started with, ensuring accessibility and inclusion, and continuing to innovate as we continue living with COVID and the pressures of trying to create a socially just society while continuing to face challenges against the fundamental parts of our work. There's always more work to be done in refining, improving, and advocating for library services and equitable access to information information and resources. This is the mission of us as library workers nationwide, and it's also the mission of all of us as members and supporters of the American Library Association.
Patty Wong, ALA President, Lesa Kananiopua Palailazada, ALA President-elect, thank you for your time today. Thank you for getting us started today at the U.S. Book Show.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Have fun, everyone.
And we'll see you in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
See you there.
This morning, we're going to talk a little bit about book bans and this wave of challenges that has arisen across the country. Now, as any librarian will tell you, book challenges are part of the work. And I would say they're even an important part of library work because a good discussion between parties acting in good faith can be a positive thing. It can help people evolve and understand one another, and a system for facilitating a good discussion only strengthens our trust in libraries. But what we're seeing today is not really about book challenges. What we're seeing today appears to be an organized, fundamental challenge to the freedom to read on an unprecedented scale. You've all seen the headlines week after week, and many of you are seeing this play out in your own communities. So to help us frame the scope of our morning discussions, I've invited two guests who have been tracking this troubling rise in book bans and other legislation targeting libraries and schools. Please welcome Deborah Caldwell Stone. Deborah is the director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom, where she leads projects addressing censorship and privacy issues in the library, including the annual release of the ALA's Top 10 Most Challenged Books. And Jonathan Friedman. Jonathan Friedman is the Director of Free Expression and Education at PEN America, where he recently published an eye-opening report titled Banned in the USA, Rising School Book Bans Threatening Free Expression and Students' First Amendment Rights, which included a Google spreadsheet documenting the alarming spike in censorship going on across the country. Deborah, I'm going to start with you and the 2021 ALA Most Challenged Book List, which showed an alarming spike in book challenges. Tell us a little bit about those numbers and, maybe also tell us a little bit about what we're talking about when we talk about challenges and how the ALA counts and tracks them.
Well, as you know, we've been tracking challenge data since 1990. It's been part of our work for decades now. And we formalized the process so that we ask librarians and educators across the country to send us reports whenever there's a demand to remove a book from a classroom or a library somewhere in the United States. And we do our best to track the outcomes. We also track media reports of challenges because often, I'll be honest, sometimes librarians are not always confident or feel free enough to make voluntary reports to our office. But we compile that data on an annual basis, and we determine what books have been the most challenged books in the United States, the reasons for it. And I will, over the years, we've usually gotten anywhere from 300 to 400 challenge reports in any given year based on all that data. And we frequently have maybe 400 books that are challenged. In the year 2021, that was all upended. We started to receive an unprecedented number of challenge reports in the fall of 2021. We went from receiving 1 or 2 reports a week to receiving 4 or 5 reports on a daily basis. I have to tell you, I've never witnessed anything like that in the 20 years I've worked for the Office for Intellectual Freedom, where and the work we've been doing with libraries across the country. We ended up the year with 729 challenges to 1,597 titles. To put those numbers in perspective, in the most recent year where schools and libraries were open and not closed because of the pandemic, we received 377 challenges. So we certainly doubled and almost tripled the number of challenges that we received. And I will tell you, most of those challenges were received between September 1st and December 31st of 2021, coinciding with the beginning of the school year.
Yeah, and Deborah, I can remember, the days when Captain Underpants used to top the list every year. And we talked about challenges, but not like we're talking about challenges now. But over the years, we've seen a change to where most of the books on the list now involve the LGBTQ plus community or issues of race. Can you talk a little bit about the trends you're seeing at ALA and specifically what you're seeing over the last year or so?
Well, we've long seen a trend at ALA of challenges to books dealing with LGBTQIA issues, the lived experiences of LGBTQIA persons, books that reflect coming of age of LGBTQIA persons. They've been on the list for almost a decade now. We have observed a rising trend of challenging works that deal with gender identity, sexual orientation, or transgender persons. And it's really become a feature of the list. We very seldom see challenges any longer, or most challenged books being books that we had traditionally seen. Judy Blume novels, John Green novels. Now it's almost exclusively books dealing with gender identity and sexual orientation. Even books that are age and developmentally appropriate, such as books like And Tango Makes Three and Heather Has Two Mommies. The other genre of books that we're seeing challenged on a regular basis are books dealing with race, racism, the lived experiences of Black persons. What's truly disturbing to us is that these challenges don't represent just challenges at the local level at a local school board. We're seeing, as you said, an organized campaign by a number of advocacy groups. We're also very disturbed by the legislation we've been monitoring throughout the years. A few years ago, we almost never had legislation on our books that we were monitoring that dealt with direct censorship. But now we're seeing a rising number of bills in state houses that deal with libraries and librarians, that intend to either punish librarians for providing LGBTQIA materials to young people, that restrict access to books under the rubric of what's called critical race theory, but really seems to be an effort to silence the voices of Black and Indigenous persons and persons of color. So it's just been it's been an amazing number of years to observe how we've reached a point where we see elected officials and legislators engaging in official censorship to limit what is available to young people in our schools and libraries, and with a particular emphasis on silencing the voices of marginalized persons. We do our best, of course, to address these trends as we observe them. We frequently hold legislative summits with our state chapters to empower them to address state legislation. We always provide individualized support to librarians on the ground and in the trenches fighting book censorship, ranging from writing letters of support to strategizing on how to address the tactics of censors. And of course, raising awareness through our most challenged book lists and through Banned Books Week, which we work on annually with a coalition of other groups, including PEN America, of course. But it has been a disturbing time to be working in our office to watch how we've pivoted from a society that seemed to value access to information and value liberal education to something less. And so as a result, I think we know that we've started a new initiative at ALA, Unite Against Book Bans. It's intended to provide a means for individuals in communities to fight censorship in schools and libraries. A grassroots advocacy campaign that is intended to empower each parent, each voter to stand up and speak out against censorship in their communities.
This is a perfect opportunity to bring Jonathan Friedman into the conversation. Jonathan, you've been tracking the rise of book challenges as well as other legislative efforts targeting the freedom to read. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and what your numbers show.
I would say that our numbers have been very complementary to the work of the ALA, and what we looked at was, has a different period of time, looking at July 2021 through March of 2022, and we looked at that time in the same sense that Deborah has been talking about, to capture a moment of intensifying attacks on school libraries and efforts to remove books with, uncanny effectivity. I mean, we've seen books removed all over the country, sometimes in droves. The images of entire libraries essentially boxing up books at just the demands of a handful of parents, or in some cases, advocacy groups or politicians. And so it's highly concerning to us that we found 1,586 book bans in that 9-month period, and that overwhelmingly 98% of them had something about the process by which the books were removed that seems somewhat less than what we would think of as a high standard, a professional best practice about how books should be reviewed. And so in many cases, challenge forms aren't being filled out. You might have just one parent who makes a complaint via an email or in a general sense at a board meeting, and suddenly the book is being disappeared from curriculum or from school libraries. In other cases, you don't have any kind of committee or community involvement. You have a decision by an administrator or even a school board to remove a book with little input from the community. Or in other cases, the books are removed immediately after a complaint without any conversation about it or without any opportunity for the book to be given what I would generally think of as a kind of due process. The books are just removed. And that's, not to say that, not to even mention the fact that the books are obviously being targeted for their content, LGBTQ content that is about sex or sex education, content relating to race and racism and the Black Lives Matter movement. It's very clear when you look at the overall picture that is what it is showing. And it's not just that a handful of titles have been targeted across state lines, or now lists of books are appearing that are the same across numerous school districts. What we're talking about is a situation where we have over 1,100 books that we found had been picked up in these efforts, and 98% of them just removed from schools without really much adequate process whatsoever. That is highly concerning, not just from the sake of the students who are being deprived of access to literature, but from the ways in which that wears on our democracy, on the fact that we're supposed to be a society that's governed by rules and notions of liberty and notions of free expression, and notion that students should be able to go to a school library and find a book that speaks to them, that reflects their identity, and that is a book that they want to read. That is being taken away from them and in these sometimes clandestine ways. And that's what's just so deeply troubling about the past year.
I've been, depending on PEN America, I've been getting your alerts, and you've been tracking what's been happening in local legislatures. And it is indeed troubling, the sharp rise that we've been seeing and how these books are just being pulled off the shelves. Can you talk a little bit about some of the legislation specifically that's of concern to you? And why this is a fundamental threat, not only to libraries and schools, but to our democracy?
I think it is a fundamental threat, and we're in a moment of tremendous fluidity right now where all kinds of proposals are being put on the table in different state legislatures. It's been like this at least since last year, starting with what we've called educational gag orders, or bills that explicitly prohibit teachers from talking about certain topics in ways that are very vague and never well explained, and leave many teachers not sure how they're supposed to do their jobs. A corollary movement has risen up in this year, in particular targeting school libraries. And it's a lot of the same rhetoric, that there are concerns about what materials are in libraries and how these might, quote unquote, indoctrinate students. There is an effort to think about new tools to control or surveil how it is that students are accessing materials. And there's a kind of hysteria that's been developing around the notion that schools are filled with materials that are, quote, obscene or pornographic or harmful to minors, when in most cases, in fact, in every case I have ever looked at, that's just simply not true. There are legal definitions of these terms, and they're being bandied about and stretched. You look at the work of a group in Florida called the Florida Citizens Alliance, which put out a report called Porn in Schools, and that report was used as a justification for banning 58 books, and it turned into 24 books effectively that were on the shelves in libraries in that district. But when you look into the report, it is so clearly driven by bigotry and anti-LGBTQ animus. We're talking about children's books that have just an illustration of same-sex couple, and that is being called pornographic. So it's very clear that these reports and demands are coming from groups that are misleading, that misrepresent these basic terms, and none of them should be taken as grounds for removing books as a result. And what's happening instead, though, is that legislators and politicians are taking those reports and they're trying to put them into action. And so we've seen efforts to make it so that schools have to report much more clearly on their websites, even though many of them already do, all the books that are in their libraries. There are efforts to introduce criminal repercussions for librarians, or to remove existing protections for them if they are found to have given a, quote, harmful piece of literature that's, quote, harmful to minors out, if they've made that available in a school library. And we've also seen these proposals for new powers, new policies, new requirements being put on schools. For example, a proposal that is now expected to be signed into law in Georgia, where a principal will be able to determine on their own when they think a book is obscene and have it removed from a library. Or a proposal in Tennessee where the state government will be able to appoint a committee that is going to be able to decide all books that are available in any school library. And it's an easy way to remove books, essentially by not including them on the list. And you have to ask who's going to be making that list. And if it's a group of political appointees, obviously we're talking about a situation that is growing highly partisan. And so that's some of the ideas that are on the table. In Kentucky, with regard to public libraries, there is a new law that is going to mean that politicians are appointing library boards. And we've seen, and in public libraries in particular around the country, all kinds of questionable choices to remove books, to move books from children's shelves to adult shelves, to dismantle access to digital library apps or other e-reading programs. And so this is a full-blown attack really on how people access literature. And although it's taking different shape in public libraries or by library boards or in school libraries, it's very clear that this is a moment of fluidity, and really anything is on the table that could be introduced. And with these forms of censorship just getting so much energy and momentum behind them, I think we all have to be alert to the fact that this has only been getting worse. This only seems to be getting more energy. The proposals are becoming more draconian and more, frankly, authoritarian in what they would institute in terms of the powers that they're giving a small number of people over what kinds of ideas and information the rest of us can access and read about. That is not supposed to be the way this works in American society. It's not the way it's supposed to work in our democracy.
It really is alarming. Deborah and Jonathan, one question for you both before we go, and that is, how do we stand up and push back to this? I know Deborah ALA did a survey, and it showed that some 70% of people oppose removing books from library shelves. So it seems like it's a very vocal minority that is pushing this. So how do we effectively push back against this? Deborah, I'll start with you.
Well, the way to push back is to organize. We have to remember that all library politics are local. We are dealing with local school boards, local library boards. And so we need to encourage parents, voters, individuals, students to come together and go to these board meetings and speak out against censorship. These groups are getting service because they're the loudest voices in the room, not because they're right or what they're doing is correct. They're obviously pushing an agenda. We have Moms for Liberty going to one school board meeting with a list of 15 books and turning around and showing up the public library with the same list, hoping to sanitize what's on the library shelves. And the way to push back is to raise our voices collectively. Unite Against Book Bans is intended to provide that organizing moment for individuals who want to come together to advocate against censorship in their communities, to speak out against this obviously discriminatory and angry effort to erase voices and lives from our communities, to criminalize the very act of placing books in the hands of children that they want and need and tell us that they want and need. So we encourage everyone to go to uniteagainstbookbans.org and sign up and join this campaign. We do have engaged with at least 32 new national partners and we're all going to put our efforts together to equipping individuals on the ground to be able to stand up against censorship. So go to board meetings, vote in the elections, know who you're voting for. Your state library association will help you with this. ALA can help you with this. We maintain a great advocacy office in our Washington office as well. We can inform you about what you can do and what steps you can take to defend the right to read in your communities. We'll also assist anybody who wishes to engage in litigation. We are, through our Freedom to Read Foundation, we're actually supporting efforts to vindicate the right to read in a number of communities, and we welcome the ability, any opportunity to assist anyone as well with that. But I would say, by and large, what I think we all should remember is that in this fight are individual librarians, and they're doing their best. They're all professionals. They're dedicated to their communities. They're dedicated to serving the needs of their communities. And by showing up at the board meetings, you're supporting them. Let them know that they're loved, that their work is loved. Let them know that ALA is behind them, that we're all behind them, that Unite Against Book Bans is there to try to organize support for them. But by and large, it means showing up, speaking up, voting, maybe even standing for election yourself and taking a place on a board so you can make sure that you defend democracy and defend the right to read.
Jonathan Friedman, PEN America, I'm going to give you the last word on this. How do we do it?
I couldn't agree more really with everything Deborah said. So just to add some additional thoughts and to echo them, this is about showing up right now. And then in many cases, in many districts, we've had handfuls of students show up, a few parents, some teachers and librarians trying to hold down the fort and stand against these voices who are demanding censorship. And they need to be met with an equally strong and robust and deep response. And unfortunately, that hasn't been the case. In a lot of places, they are carrying the day, in large part because we have to think about who has the ability to go to a school board meeting and who doesn't, who has the ability to get involved and follow these politics and who doesn't. And that doesn't mean that those people who are strapped for time shouldn't be guaranteed the right to read in their schools. And so there's a need to collectively galvanize, mobilize, organize, and show up, and to think about all of the various people here who are being affected: writers, publishers, illustrators, students in particular, who are being deprived. And so in many cases, there are people here who are afraid to speak out. There are teachers and librarians who are being harassed and who are terrified of really telling the public what's going on. And so we need more of these stories out in the public. We need to make people understand exactly what's going on. And in fact, those of us who are paying attention and watch this every day cannot believe the kinds of stories that reporters are able to show. For example, it just came out that in Florida, some of the groups that have been demanding book banning are also the groups who were behind the scenes pulling strings in Governor DeSantis's recent prohibition on certain math textbooks. So there is coordination happening behind the scenes here that we all need to be paying much greater attention to, and that we have to do a good job of, for those of us who can speak out, to do so, recognizing that others in our communities may not be able to. I can't stress enough the need to stay tuned into this issue and realize that it is a bellwether, a significant bellwether for our democracy and where we are heading as a country. You know, I think in a lot of cases, there might be one book removed in a curriculum in a community, and a lot of people say, well, you know, that book had something in it that was taboo or that our students shouldn't have had access to anyways. But what is very clear from those of us who are watching this over time, especially in the past year, is that snowball effect, that what started as a few books in a few places is now lists of books. And what began as lists of books are now full-out bans and full-out alterations and policy changes in states. And it very well could spread to other levels of government. We saw a demand this week that we demand that the government create new ratings for television shows to alert parents to which shows have LGBTQ content, which is a shocking suggestion, but there it is. And so this is not going away on its own. It is only getting more powerful and getting more momentum behind it as a culture war issue as we head into the 2022 and 2024 elections. And people need to, as Deborah said, get involved, speak out, and see how they can contribute to this movement.
Jonathan Friedman from PEN America, Deborah Caldwell Stone from the American Library Association. Thank you for joining us today at the U.S. Book Show.
Thanks so much.